Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ramblemancy.
That
Sorry, my words went faster than my brain was moving, and then there was then my words caught up to where my
we're off
brain
to a,
was. And
we're off to a really good start.
anyway, hi, everybody. It's Ramblemancy. That's us. We're here tonight to talk about all kinds of stuff. But Freeman, stop! Don't, mm-mm, mm-mm. Don't look at me. Um, we
That's
are
okay, I will.
here. We're we're here with Joe from Rune and Relic, who is here to talk with us about probably mostly nothing. Actually, is the reality. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to break your streak of going absolutely nowhere. That'd be
I'm gonna
Yeah, I
die
mean-
this episode.
damn near. What the fuck just happened?
We're coming in with an energy that we did not have prior to the live button being hit. Anyway,
The vortex.
welcome to the Vortex. Welcome, Joe, to Ramblemancy. This is your first time on Ramblemancy, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Popped in here and there, but most of my games that I'm actually a player in happen on Friday. So I usually, but this is a good chance because we don't have a game, so I do have the ability to do that. So.
Hell yeah. Well, welcome. Before we get into tonight's Ramblemancy, our announcements are sort of minimal today because last Monday, just this past Monday, was the series finale for Tomorrow is Dead. And yeah, it was a big one. So if you haven't seen that, you can go check it out anytime over on the Rule of Lore YouTube. But yeah, it sort of signaled kind of the sort of this soft end of Rule of Lore's actual
Punchy
play
end.
era. Yeah. The sort of soft end of Rule of Lore's actual play era. So I'm not really sure what the future holds for us at this point. Ramblemancy will be around for a while, that's for sure. But more than that, we're not really sure. We're sort of kind of at a pivot point for Rule of Lore these days. So that said, the moment the words came out of my mouth, I knew what was going to happen. Anyway, yeah, so that's kind of really our biggest announcement right now. Otherwise, there are also changes coming to our Patreon, which, if you are a patron, you have seen some of those already. And we can go into more. Yeah, Edge of It. Rule of Lore is clearly a Fortnite channel now. Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Whoa,
Listen, Edge of
that'd
It.
be a fall.
When you're right, and you're wrong. So anyway, so
I don't remember this in Dante Alighieri's Inferno.
They removed
But yeah.
those pages.
So there will be changes coming to the Patreon. We've already implemented one for the $10 tier, but for the $5 tier, we're also kind of going to be implementing some changes there as well, and we'll be talking about those relatively soon. So if you are in the Discord, that's where you will be most likely able to find those announcements. Yeah. Also, you may have noticed that our resident bard John Boyle has not joined us tonight because John's con season is kicking off sooner than even we expected. So, yeah, this is kind of going to be the new norm for a while. I said that there was going to be sort of thin announcements, but I'm realizing as I'm talking that there's more than I thought because next Friday, there will not be a Ramblemancy. As we sort of prepare and kind of move towards replacing John, not replacing John, just bringing in our first guest host and getting them settled and that sort of stuff. So that next week there will be no Ramblemancy, but the week after that we will pick up again with guest host and friend of the show, Kate O'Sullivan, who is often here in chat. Anyway, let's begin. Joe, I know we talked a little bit about some of the stuff that we might start off our conversation with tonight, and one of the things that
we're gonna try to hit.
Yeah, one of the things that we already talked about right even before the cameras went live was being caught off guard by players at the table, which is one of the things that you that you posited to me as a possible moment. So I'm seeing as how this is something that that you sort of floated as a topic. I'm curious. Have you had like what are some recent experiences you've had with that?
Oh, geez. Okay. Let's see. There's. It's hard to narrow out some of them because some of them don't stick out as heavily as
Hmm.
others. But
I see
one that
Lynn in chat is
really,
already like cackling.
when you are not safe, just keep that in mind. Um,
Oh my gosh.
but in terms of like player surprises, one that truly uh sticks out to me is doing a. You're not gonna win this fight. But
My
one of the
gosh,
things that
Dylan.
I have no context for this still. But one
Sorry.
of the players for like when we were doing an Occult Chronicles recording, which is uh it's still trying, like, I'm getting the upload stuff going finally. It's just YouTube likes to sometimes fight you tooth and nail for things.
Yep.
Because why not? But I know there was one that really stuck out to me. It was kind of a piece during the Occult Chronicles where it's kind of there were like these 9 type of like bone charm totems, which were totally like mostly set dressing. They were kind of just scenario driven things that might have come up, but they just chose not to. Like
Hmm.
they could have easily just chosen to just leave them be. Um, However, one of my players decided the best chance to do, and keep in mind this thing was like they detected like, I don't know, necromantic energy or something like that on it. It's like, what if I just break it like a wishbone? Um, I was like, okay, and then I had to roll, you know, was like a D10 or something, and a random effect would occur, and and I had to determine like which one got broken. And it just narratively worked out, and like that we can, you know, you're both here, awesome. Um, but it just kind of worked out in that regard to where narratively it just ended up working out really well. But rolling the D10, like each of these charms had an aspect of like a circle of the hells, so and would get benefits sort of out of it,
Sure.
but like trade off because it's not a good thing really. So you have to just like, wait, you got certain things. It's you get really cool abilities, but also it might just possess you. So there's also, let's see, which other one that sticks out in recent
Well, I
memory?
had a sort of related question because as you were talking, I realized one of the things that I think is interesting. What is in your experience? What is your favorite way in which a player can surprise? Like, what makes it from being something that like is sort of causes you to stumble into something that like that is sort of it becomes a sort of a memorable experience. Like what are the elements of that being caught off guard that kind of stick out as far as yeah that make it kind of a memorable experience.
Well, first of all, it's kind of like pushing a snowball down a mountain
Mm-hmm.
effect. Mainly because the player might do something, and you're a GM, Lucas, so you know this.
Mm-hmm.
Is they'll do something, and you kind of sit there like, I didn't think of that. Uh, but for the most part, the thing I like is when a player surprises me. Is the way I like it the most is when they come up with a clever solution to something that I myself might have considered way back then, but it's like, you know, threading the needle for that. Or maybe I just didn't even think of it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're talking about like being caught off guard and stuff like that, I enjoy that as a DM because as a DM, you have to, and we'll get to this topic, I'm sure, in a moment. But like in terms of, and this is something that all you fledgling GMs should know. Railroading, no one knows what the fuck that means. But in terms of that is kind of choosing to not have the guards up on the bowling alley and choosing to have them down and let them just go into the gutter and then, like, all right, well, you get another roll, so you might as well see what happens. But I enjoy those moments because, one, it is a testament to, when I first started to now is just how have I improved and how quickly can I recover without it looking forced or unnatural. And it works 50% of the time. I don't think I'm gonna be generous with myself because there are times where I just get caught way off guard. Yeah. But there was one. Oh, there's one too. This was in our sort of feudal fantasy Russia game that we are running presently, which is that one's actually coming to a close too. Oh, sad day. But what I think Phantom Rogue was going to be, and this rogue has this tendency, I don't know why, but he has this tendency to get arrested or investigated in every fucking town that he goes into. And he was going to be, not apprehended, but questioned by, city watch or guard or whatever. He's like, alright, well, I'm going to grab this, cloak or whatever, and threw it over himself and made, a rush to the window and dropped the cloak, and he's like, you have Misty Step? He's like, no, I'm gonna turn invisible and then just stop. And it's like, oh, let's see. The window's not open. They're not arcanely, trained at all. They're just guards. They don't have anything like that. But, and so for things like that, it's just, a creative solution to not get captured. He was still fully in the room with them. But the way that was alright, well, let's see. Performance, probably. Invisibility, and then we're not going to... the DC for the perception or whatever, or investigation, whatever I did for it, it's I'm going to give them a penalty, but I'm not going to fully give them disadvantage, only because if you are in a, because this was 5th edition, you're in a D&D world and you have someone that even who is not magically inclined, he's I don't understand magic. It's yeah, you do. To a degree, you understand it.
Yeah.
So I just chose to perception check, and I'll just basically give them a roll, a Bane or something, and then that lowered the DC. Is that's what you got to beat. And I mean, he's a rogue with invisibility, stealth expertise. And he did pass it, but this poor rogue, I swear to fucking God, he does not roll higher than
oh no,
10 on the die every single time. And it still gets up there to 20 something. We know it can be higher. We know it can be higher. It just chooses not to be. I think a 16 is I think if it's the total roll is a 16, I think it's a 3 on the die.
Wow.
Yeah, certain surprises like that.
I think so. My fairly recent one is sort of minor because it didn't have broad-reaching consequences or fallout from it. But I had a player who decided to make in one session decided to make grenades, and then in which happened. This player is an artificer. So then, but then in
you know what you're getting yourself into then.
In a combat situation where they didn't have direct line of sight on a lot of the enemies, he was like, okay, so I made grenades. I was like, yeah. He's like, okay, but I was also reading the spell catapult, and this was Freeman, literally last night.
Last night.
And Freeman used catapult on the grenade and hit a guy with the grenade, and then did damage with that grenade.
And the catapult, yeah.
And the catapult, both of them.
Yeah.
He did double. He did 2 instances of damage with the same grenade, and that was.
Catapult is one of those spells that just doesn't get appreciated as much. I feel like because it is very. I would say, in my opinion, honestly, it's a very situational spell. It's kind of like one of those spells that doesn't come up till like everyone's forgotten about it, and it's like, wait, what the fuck do you have? It's kind of like knock. That is a spell that is so horridly underutilized, I think, because a lot of people are like, you get locked in, a dungeon or something. And it's like, this is a dungeon, right? It's like, is there any magical? It's like, knock, gone. It's a very situational spell, but it is a spell that no matter how much like thought process a GM will put into it, is one of those spells that people like. Wait, hold the fuck. Wait, what? No. What's going on?
Yeah. I think my favorite instances of like players catching me off guard is it tends to be like kind of like you said, when they come up with a solution that you weren't anticipating, but it's more often than not my favorite instances are when I provide players with option A, which is bad, and option B, which is differently bad, and they're like, but what if we came up with option C, which is actually great all around? And I'm sitting there going like, yeah, that'll work. That'll work.
That works just
sure.
fine.
Those are, I think, some of my favorite instances where like that kind of thing happens, because you kind of devise a situation as a GM to kind of put them into this like between a rock and a hard place kind of thing, and force them into a moral quandary, and then they're like, what if we didn't do either of those things though? And oh hey, we did do that in Intelligence, yeah.
Yes, actually that is actually a good another kind of surprise, because I didn't anticipate that answer, because I think on a base level.
Hold on, just to be clear, Joe, you, a Star Trek fan and GM of a Star Trek Adventures game, did not expect one of your players to quote James T. Kirk at you, and then just to be clear that this is what we're talking about.
Sort of. Like, I got that, but the thing that, like, I think it caught me off guard because the whole season, it had kind of been slated to be, like, Intelligence is definitely it has a more, in my opinion, the way I've designed it is, because it's more grounded, right? It's not episodic by the week. It's kind of like arcs, and also the setting is important, yes, but Intelligence has always been, to me, it's been more about character than setting.
Sure.
The setting is not important as much as the character is, and that's really weird to say in like TTRPG sense, because I don't mean, some people are going to get duh, but to have Intelligence kind of put in, or at least that final arc, put that sort of silent expectation as like, you have 2 bad choices. And actually, I think it was you, Lucas, that was like, what if we just didn't fucking do that at all? And what if we didn't do this mission and did what we were supposed to do from the very beginning, which is find a common ground and just also go out of your way to piss off higher administration.
What if we piss off Starfleet by checks notes being Starfleet?
But that was another one where it's like, no, that will work. And truly, it comes down to the quote, right? A successful negotiation is in which no one is happy.
Yeah.
And like neither side came out of that, like all that like triforce of powers. No one came out of that, please. Absolutely no one came out of that like, yeah, we did great and everything's good. Everyone is like, I got a stick of gum from a claw machine. This is awesome.
I've got a jar of dirt.
Good.
No, the dirt had importance.
I agree. I think those sorts of moments are so to me as a GM, I feel like so much of my job is knowing stuff.
Hmm.
And so when players can do something that I didn't see coming, that's where I get my enjoyment out of like TTRPGs. Where, because like my whole job is basically to know things and
Yeah.
to like be the holder of information and the distributor of that information. And when players can do something that I just like wasn't anticipating at all, that makes me happy because I'm like, oh, cool, it's a new and exciting thing. And maybe that's an ADHD thing. I don't know. But maybe it's just a, the human brain
Everyone
likes
here
novelty.
and everyone over here in chat is you know they understand. But it is truly, I think, to your point, what I like about players surprising me is to like again knowing things and then players kind of enforcing portions of it that is like actually you don't really know anything at all. And then you're just going, well, shit, you're right.
It's also very fun. Sort of a variation on this instance that we're talking about is it's very fun to me when players will use my own nonsense against me.
Oh god, it's
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 where
great,
they'll
but
be
it's
like,
also torment.
where they'll be like, hold on, hold on, hold on. But didn't you say that this works like this? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, okay, so couldn't I do this with it? And I just sit there going, I can't think of a single logical reason why not. So sure. And
It's
those moments are always fun for me.
it's also for me is why I like the whole concept and like maybe just segue us it's why I like running shorter things too in
Mm-hmm.
terms of campaigns. Not because like you have because you don't have as much room, right? With like a long form like 1 to 20 game, it's you don't have that freedom to be like, okay, we can kind of take our time and figure this out. Prepping for short games kind of teaches you that you have to be, and I don't know if this was your experience in for Tomorrow's Dead Season 2, but um, the shorter a game, the longer the prep. That's always
Mm-hmm.
how it's been for me. Only because like you have a limited amount of time to kind of get this, and why I have like I think I have Star Trek Intelligence always sits at anywhere from like 12 to 15 episodes. Um, Currently I think season 2 is going to be 15 as well, but um, you have to be on your game when you're running a short game because
Yeah.
your players will do that thing where it's like, but you said 2 sessions ago this thing works. Is like, I did, didn't I?
I sure did say that. Yeah. No, it's
But
I think when it
yeah,
comes to shorter game, I tend not to run shorter games as much as possible, mainly because it just doesn't coincide well with my the way my brain works. Because like when I'm planning stuff, I plan like way out there, and I tend to
hmm
play like slow burns. And that's not to say that there's nothing going on in the meantime, but it's just like the payoff isn't coming for a while because I have to spend the time seeding things ahead of time. But when I have done the sort of shorter games, it comes in one of two varieties. It comes in the variety of either like, yes, the shorter the game, the longer the prep, or head empty, no prep, let's go. and that and
which
that to be honest
which
with
can be
you,
fun, but it can also have a whole different type of stress.
well, and to be honest with you, I'm saying that mostly joking, but there is a real and practical way to do that. And the best example I think is Tomorrow is Dead season 1, where we planned nothing except the premise.
Hmm.
The premise was a bunch of high school students go away for their last hurrah as a friend group before they sort of split off in different directions and come back to the zombie apocalypse. That was the whole amount of prep that went into that because everything else after that was reactionary. Players trying to like survive now. Now it's about surviving.
Yeah.
And whatever you do to achieve that end, that's what this show is. That's what this game is going to be.
I
And
think that makes sense for this because it was Kids on Bikes at that time, right?
Mhm.
So,
yeah.
I think it makes sense for that only
Well, that's the
because
thing. It's like I don't think it
Kids
would
on
work for
Bikes is designed to
everything.
be reactionary. So,
Yeah, and I genuinely don't think that would work for every game, every group, or whatever. I genuinely don't think it
no.
would work. It's highly premise dependent, which I think
Mhm.
is you have to have a strong and clear premise, which is what we tried to do in season 2, but unfortunately season 2 we had a certain number of like check marks that we had to hit that sort of required us to have our hands on the wheel a little bit more than we did in season 1. But for the most part, after that first arc where in season 2 where the group was getting to the bunker, after that we're like literally this is the only part of this that we are planning. Everything after that is going to just be player dependent, and that's kind of what we tried to do. And yeah, so like I don't think that approach works every time, because I do think that the way that you sort of set it up as like the shorter the game, the longer the prep, I think is more the rule than the exception.
Yeah, and I think you're also right too with like Tomorrow is Dead season 2 is a good you put it very succinctly as like checkpoints. You have to hit these beats
Mm-hmm.
because it's one of those things, and that's why when I do run a shorter game, I have to know taking some randomly mulligan advice, which is the shorter the game, everyone tell me what the fuck you're doing. Like from
Mm-hmm.
start to finish, what is your plan, or what is like your weird amalgamation of a plan that will inevitably make me pivot somehow, some way. But and also depending on what is considered a short game in certain people's minds,
Right.
for me, a short game is 4 to 12. That's usually what I consider a short game.
Yeah.
Um, and I know intelligence is generally sitting 12 to 15. I don't count that because it's running in seasons. That doesn't count because
Mm-hmm.
you have like certain arcs you want to hit, but if one arc doesn't get picked up and it's like, well, this one's going over here then, and then you just shift that one over there. Uh, but in terms of short seasons, and also, I know this is a temptation for a lot of people when running a shorter game, especially like a 5th edition stuff. I know there's this temptation to do a higher level game. This is my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. I highly, highly suggest you do something lower level.
Mm-hmm.
Because lower level forces a player and their characters to seek out more creative solutions. They can't just punch it really hard and make it work out.
Yeah.
And that's not to say things can't be interesting. You can't make combats feel threatening. Because I know, like, again, CR doesn't mean anything in a monster mount. It literally means nothing.
Yeah.
Because, I think a shadow is a CR1, and it most definitely should be like a CR2, maybe even a 3 with how deadly they can be.
Yeah.
Especially
Well-
with Peter Pans.
There you go. Yes, exactly. I was actually going to ask you a question, Freeman, because we're talking about this a little bit, but because you've been in a lot of long-term games with me, and you've been in a lot of shorter games. As a player in those things, what do you see as like sort of the major difference between those from the player perspective?
I don't know if there seems to be. It really, if you're asking me, I guess it would be which you are. So, I would say it's the amount of work I would put into character, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm thinking about it, I'm backtracking a little bit now, because sometimes for characters for a shorter game, I've actually somehow put a lot more thought into it. And for a long-term game, yeah, I don't actually really know. I would think it's character
you are
work.
right in terms of a shorter game, because I have been a part of a few, but a shorter game, you do put a lot more thought in it because you want something more fleshed out. You don't have the time to flesh it out as much.
Right, that's right. You're trying to get like all the highlights,
And also, to make a character interesting, again, in a shorter game, there are certain things you don't have to talk about at all. This can just be knowledge for you, but that knowledge will inform how you're going to play going forward. And if you have a character with a established history and everything, and not to say like that'll be incorporated to the game or anything, but it helps you. It it's not for the GM, it's not for the game necessarily as a
Right.
whole, it's just for you. And if it's just for you, that's totally fine uh if it makes the experience and the characterization as genuine as possible without doing an injustice to the game in which you're in.
Yeah, I think Edge of Fit put it nicely, kind of basically what you're saying into sort of like succinct way, which is I think a shorter game, the development happens before their game for a longer, and for a longer game, development happens during the game. And I think especially with Freeman, with you, I feel like I've noticed that a lot more. I think you, of all the players that I have, you tend to put, not less work into your characters, but it's like you don't bring a complete character to the table in a longer game. You bring sort of like a loose skeleton that you sort of flesh out over the course of the campaign.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you know what made it a lot easier this time around? This kid is literally 17, 18 years old. So they don't have too much. They don't have too much that they would say in terms of like when you have like a D&D party. Everyone's like mid-20s or 30s, I guess, right? I don't know if that's the case, but like there's some backstory, right? And I literally just want this kid to be like orphaned and now is going on an adventure and is learning things. Like I left some of the bond is still like, when you're filling out your...
Oh, yeah.
I left the bond open just because maybe something will happen with this group of people and then that can be my bond. And it turns out that I'm fairly certain that like there's this section where you can choose to be like, you owe someone your life, right? And so I was like, actually that fits right now because Amari, the one of the characters, saved my character's life from the brink of like death. And so my character's now, I wrote into the bond area, I feel like I owe this guy my life.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
a very specific incident that happened in the game.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also Leah, hi Leah, said you got to understand your character kind of right off the bat, whereas in a longer game you have time to feel them out / settle in. 100%. I think that's and I think that's why I equally don't enjoy playing in short games either, because I think that's a little bit where I live as a player too, is I live in that space of I don't know who this character is, and it's hard for me to shift from GM thinking to focusing on the story of a single character. And so when it comes to a short game, I feel this intense pressure to like flesh them out fully, but I don't tend to think in those terms. I prefer sort of an emergent style of storytelling, right, where it comes out as it goes along, and it's harder for me, I think, to make a character that is fleshed out for the short term, and so I tend not to do it. And I end up playing sort of kind of two-dimensional characters, which there's nothing wrong with playing a two-dimensional character, especially in a short-term game, because when the hell are you going to have time to like make any of that relevant, There's nothing wrong with playing a two-dimensional character. It's just that, I don't know, I feel like some of the most enjoyment that I have as a player is through exploring my character, and that's hard for me to do in a short game. Which is, I think, one of the reasons that as a player I don't enjoy short games, whereas as a DM I don't enjoy short games for a totally different reason, and that's usually for me, as I've been very vocal about on this channel, for me, the work that goes into making that short game is rarely worth the payoff of running that short game. But that's me. I'm not.
Yeah, I think that's like all personal preference, of course. But in terms of, again, this is why I wanted the whole, I guess a good way of putting it, right, is when you run a short, that's why I suggested like a lower level, because a lower level,
yes,
your character isn't as fleshed out. They don't have to be. Now that's not to say you can't have someone who's like world really inexperienced, but you have to the level should reflect their experience to a degree. Because you're not gonna have some level 1, muck in some backwater town being like, "Yeah, I slayed a dragon." It's like, no, the fuck you didn't.
Well, okay,
You
but hold
smashed a
on.
winged salamander.
So hold on, because I agree with you, but I'm gonna like do the thing where I'm like, okay, but what if we take this thing that we say doesn't work and make it work? And you know what's actually really interesting? I made a character recently that was based on an interesting idea that I was introduced to through playing Baldur's Gate 3, right? Which is in terms of Gale, right? Gale, the wizard. And there's potential spoilers if I'm not going to talk about his whole deal, but I will talk about like a small element of his backstory that is sort of usually kind of glossed over in favor of like the more dramatic elements of his backstory. So just bear that in mind. So Gale has an interesting portion of his backstory that it usually only comes up in just like 1 or 2 lines of dialogue throughout the whole game. And it is that at one point, Gale was a full-blown arch wizard. Like he was a full-blown archmage.
Mm-hmm.
And now he isn't because of a thing that happens in his backstory, whatever. Like his gifts being consumed by a thing. Anyway, and that got me thinking, what other ways could you make a character who had their own adventures, who was like a high level adventurer at one point, but now is level 1? How could you justify that? And I actually made a character recently who was retired. He was a retired adventurer, and it had been decades since he had been like an adventurer, and he had retired for the quiet life.
Oh, those skills are gonna be a little rusty. If
Exactly.
Not gold.
Exactly. So like that to me is like, so I love the idea of, I think you can play a low level character with lots of with the experience of a higher level character. You just have to do a lot more front work in terms of like justifying
you have to think a lot harder. I
Yeah.
would say. And that's the thing. Actually, now going back on it, I'm taking back the word a tiny bit. So don't fucking at me. But the
No, on Ramblemancy we don't change our opinions no matter what evidence we're presented with.
Oh, yeah, cannons. Sorry if I spiked.
But the Fantasy Russia game, one of the players is playing, a descendant of the former Tsar, trying to reestablish, because feudal Russia, if you know anything, it was just broken in every sense of the word, and that because I had taken this player who I asked me, and this is why I love like now as a GM, it's like I need more than one person to create this world or I'll die. But I took basically a fully established like world and dynasty, and it's like, you're a historian, break this beyond repair. And then it's like, okay, but his character was a very accomplished wizard at one point, and during like a coup and stuff, he took a grievous injury to the point where it's like casting somatics and stuff became difficult. And so we just like, and that's how we'll just narratively decide that you're level 3 at the start of this. So I do have, but then we reflected it into like, but your mechanical stuff has been nerfed, but some of your world knowledge is going to be higher, only because you've lived it. So
right.
But also, again, like there is, to your point, there is ways to make a character who has done those things feel realistic, but in like the general sense where people, who don't have a full understanding is like, yeah, I defended my town from a dragon at like 20 years old and I killed it. It's like, no.
no, I actually don't think you did do that.
No. You gotta look at that. You should go back to that inn. I don't think those were standard mushrooms in that stew. But that's one of those things too, and it's just it's a learned thing, because it's right. You get out of that habit to where you just when you're new to teach, you kind of do that. Everyone's done that, and anyone who says they haven't done that is lying. You have, I know. But as you get out of that, especially people who are more who do creative writing or something, or consume decent media and like can recognize like bad writing versus good writing, like a lot of stuff on Amazon Prime. But then or HBO, whatever. I could name any of these streaming services.
That's true.
But you learn very quickly is like, I don't have to have my character be, super powerful or be in a high station to be interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
More and
plenty
more
of characters that are very interesting that are not, like, in the grand scheme of the world, not that impressive.
More and more, I'm finding that the characters that attract my attention are the ones who are just a guy. You know? Like nothing special, just kind of a guy. Like usually out of their element, probably. Like, but just a guy.
Yeah.
I suppose you could probably say that a little bit about Alec. In Star Trek Intelligence, Alec was just a guy.
In a way, but like.
Alec was just a guy in the sense that, like, the whole reason I made him was to sort of go against this notion of, like, the A-type personality that we seem to be exposed to constantly in Starfleet, you know? And, like, I made him as like, a sort of mirror to that, you know? Because I wanted to explore what does it look like when you're not one of the, like, people who's rocketing to the top of the tier list in Starfleet. What does it look like when you're just one of the regular students who just kind of barely made it through, you know?
It's really strange how intelligence worked out because the command team for intelligence is just one of those teams where it's like, this is not your typical like group. Like some of them are very passive in terms of Alex Gage. Well, I wouldn't say passive, but like a little bit more linear in terms of stance. And then there's others that are just like, this person's just straight up neurotic. But it is an interesting blend of everything because, and it's truly one of those things too, where it's, you don't learn how to do that right away. You do that by tripping upwards, failing upwards.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to understand that until you've kind of figured out, like, this is boring, actually.
And a thing, another way that I've seen that put a lot is that when you start out playing TTRPGs, you tend to play an idealized version of yourself, or that you play something, like you play a character with idealized elements of yourself. And then after you play for a while, then you start playing characters who are genuinely characters in their own right. That they definitely have elements of you because that's unavoidable. But that they're not like idealized versions of yourself. They're just characters in their own right with their own flaws and maybe deeply flawed. And like, and I think that that's a natural trajectory of playing TTRPGs. And that doesn't mean that everybody will go through that trajectory, but I do think that it is sort of the natural progression, you know?
Yeah, it is, I would say. In the vast majority of things, I would say that is the natural progression. And it is one of those things that again, with short games, I enjoy seeing that because it is short games, like you said, it can be very hard to develop out a character, but especially like whenever I've run like short D&D games, I try to give like sort of a full campaign feel in a short run as best I can.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to, like, I know the concept of like railroading is, and short games you have to some degree. And again, pointing to audience here, railroading, no one understands what that means. But railroading is there for a reason. It is a path. A path has to be taken. Whether that path has deviations or not is entirely up to you, but it is your job as a GM, especially if you know the characters and know kind of how they're playing. You have to facilitate a worldly experience that feels lived in, that allows you to get to that end path in the most organic and honest way possible.
And I think that's my problem with like short campaigns. And I think my issue with short campaigns is not short campaigns are bad. It's I am not good enough at the skills required to run a good short campaign, because like for me, an ending has to feel earned, and I have a hard time making that happen in a short game. That's
Yes,
that's a
it can be
hard
very
thing to do. And so I'm like, when I say I tend not to like running short campaigns, it's not because I think they're bad inherently or anything about them is bad. It's that I know that there are skills that I just am not that good at, that are required for running a short campaign versus a long campaign. Um, and I know it's just because I haven't done it enough, but
Mhm.
I also don't have a lot of incentive to do it more. So,
Yeah.
like,
And
yeah,
I mean, when you run so many, games like I am, and actually Liz putting a very good aspect of it, not the self-deprecation part, but but like players sometimes do need that guidance. They
yeah.
like sometimes, Lucas, I'm sure you've experienced this, but how many times have you run a session where you're kind of just sitting there, and yeah, the RP is like also good, but you're also sitting there like, guys, we got to move on, please. It's been
Yes.
2.5 hours, and you've been in this same room or this same shop or this same inn.
Mm.
It's like you've done nothing but go in a clover leaf. You
Yeah.
have to take an exit.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, in sort of like a more macro sense, we actually literally just had a conversation about this in our game last night, because in sort of a more macro sense, our whole campaign has kind of been like that without anybody really realizing that that's what was happening, which is a whole group of very well-meaning players trying to facilitate everyone else at that table's fun at the expense of their own. And very well meaning, but you could see how that would be a problem, where it ended up with nobody was willing to commit to a course of action, and so like most of the campaign ended up being like very passive, you know. So yeah, it's a thing that we had to. Yesterday, I had to sort of like at the beginning, I had to address it and be like, all right, listen, y'all need to like commit to courses of action and trust that like I as the GM will give everyone a chance to be in the spotlight. You do not have to take it upon yourself as a player to move that spotlight off of yourself. If it's on you, it's because I put it there, and that's where it needs to be right now.
Mhm.
Like, don't feel bad about it. Um,
I think that's something that I try very hard to do, especially in shorter runs. Longer runs, I don't have to do that as much because
right.
I set the expectation in session 0 sometimes, like, and also this is something you have to do in terms of short games, and this is something I also suggest in terms of like running shorter form campaigns. If you especially if you plan on doing like full edits and stuff like that, if you plan on doing that, run like a session 0/character build, do that all in one, and then do like 2 playtests or something like that. Playtest a session out, and it can be, considered historic canon or not. You can choose to toss it out or anything, but it helps. In my experience, it helps players kind of toss the baton back and forth.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
is difficult to do that, but it is like again in a short form, I try to facilitate a long campaign feel by allowing like those moments of like very intense and sometimes very emotional RP moments happen, but that can only happen one is if you establish this very on in a session 0 or session 0 is also don't ever have the expectation that there's only one session 0. There can be many.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But have set that expectation, and then once that expectation is set, and if they're down for it, the amount of weight that lifts off your shoulders when the players are like deep into it, which I am very lucky in terms of Star Trek intelligence that I have such a well rounded, I would say, not grounded, down to earth type of cast where it's like they kind of know enough to be like, I'm gonna pull out and we're gonna like
Yes.
being transitioned over here. Like I might have to like gently like guide it a little bit, but it has never had to be a rough transition. It has always just been a gentle like. I think we've hit a natural conclusion to where we can transition to a different scene.
Yes.
And that's why it. That's the other thing with short campaigns. You have to find like the right group for it because some groups are not good for it. They just aren't. And
Yeah.
that's not a fault of theirs, and it's not a fault of yours. It's just that's how it's gonna slice out to work.
Yeah. Well, that and also that I think that yes, you're right. That's very important, a very important part of it. I also think that there's a certain on the flip side of this, I find that in long campaigns more and more one of the things that I've seen is players coming to the table with like fully fleshed out kind of like backstories and stuff like that, where some of the most interesting thing that has happened to them has already happened. And I'm like, well, but like, this is the campaign we're playing, and you're like basically writing it. So, and like ended up with players who end up frustrated in the game because they don't know what to do with their character. I'm like, well, that's because you already decided what, like the major beats in their life, that has happened.
And that's another thing is when running a short campaign, you have to have like don't always like you can have interesting things happen in your backstory. By all means, let it happen. But
you can't resolve them in your backstory.
Do not have the most interesting thing in your backstory, or if you do have a very interesting thing in your backstory, do not add it at the cost of drive. Because if you have no drive, you have no trajectory. If you have no trajectory, the momentum just falls flat on its face.
Yeah. No, very true. Very true. And like, yeah, like that's the thing. Like, you can have interesting stuff in your backstory. That's not to say don't have interesting stuff happen in your backstory. It's just don't resolve it in your backstory, because that's what the campaign is for. Like that's what we're playing for. You're playing to resolve the stuff in your backstory. That's the reason you have a backstory. Because like I don't know, I know that there are some styles of play where the player characters are not like they're not the driving force and the focus of the campaign. The players are there to sort of insert themselves into the world in some way that they can, right? And that's fair and fine. I also think that it's not it's not mutually exclusive to have a campaign where the player characters are there to sort of find a way to sort of impose themselves onto the world, but also learn who they are along the way and resolve things from their past along the way. I don't think those are mutually exclusive things, and I've even seen it like I don't take anything that Matt Colville says, like I don't take anything as law, and I think he would have it no other way, frankly. But I also have seen instances where he's said stuff where I've like disagreed with it, where I'm like, I personally don't see the value in playing a campaign where the players' backstories and or like personal dramas aren't relevant or don't come to play out. Like,
because I don't know. This is my take on it, and I kind of agree with you on this one because I have seen some of like Matt Goebbels, and I agree with some of the stuff, but some of it I look at it and just go like, this feels very antagonistic. I don't like that.
Or if not antagonistic, then at the very least, like it's like you're inviting the players to play in a world that you've already made.
For sure.
A little bit, yeah. At the very least, what you're doing is telling them that they have the freedom and the responsibility to sort of impose their will on the world, but you're also weirdly telling them that like the world doesn't have a responsibility or to impact them, and that feels weird and like disingenuous and not particularly.
The world impacts modern day real life. The world impacts any of us whether we want it to or not. So that's not to me, that sounds like taking away an organic feeling to a
Right.
world almost.
Yeah.
Because the world is going to keep turning, and actions are going to happen, and like a ripple in a pond, it's going to hit you some way. It might not hit you
Exactly.
heavily,
Every
or even a
experience you
lot,
have shapes who you are, like regardless of whether or not it was tailor made to like in real life. I'm sure there are people who can disagree with this vehemently, but that's hey. In real life there's no like tailor-made experiences for you, Joe, to like explicitly to design to shape who you are. But experiences that you do have are going to shape who you are.
and they're also going to inform that person going forward, whether it's you, me, or three men, whatever. Those things uh, will always like, and this is one of those things like taking. It's why I like picking apart and taking pieces of like different GMs, like certain experiences in terms of like how do I run things in the most effective way possible to generate the most uh, genuine experience and most enjoyable experience for a player. And one of the ones I've taken from is sometimes, especially with short games, and I know this isn't everyone's flavor, but with short games, I don't have the time to come up with like battle sets all the time,
Yeah.
or battle maps, because
Sure.
I just don't. And because I have no idea what the players are going to do. Now, the trade-off for that, of course, is then you're doing Theater of the Mind. Theater of the Mind gives you plenty of things to be more cinematic. However, again, kind of like a short campaign, you have to be on your A game for Theater of the Mind, I feel like, as opposed to a
Yeah.
battle map,
Yeah.
because you have to note, like, is it raining? Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? What's the weather like? What's the atmosphere? Where, all these different things. And you can also remind players, like, please, for the love of God, ask questions. I'm not going to remember everything. But also, with Theater of the Mind, especially, and this is the thing I learned running Theater of the Mind combats so much better, especially big combats. If it's just smaller combats, I generally just end up rolling dice. But if it's a larger combat, or if there's multiple combatants to the point where I think it's going to be too much for me to keep track of and keep rolling dice, re-roll the initiatives. For any of your enemy combatants, re-roll the initiatives, pre-roll the damage. And that kind of helps expedite combat, and that way you can help narrate and stuff. And also, but Theater of the Mind is one of those things too. You have to, and I don't fully agree, but I don't fully disagree. In Theater of the Mind, there are two classes that kind of get shit on with that, and that's rogues and monks a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
But it also doesn't happen too, because if you have a group that fully trusts that narrative, and you can quickly come to like, how far do you think you were? Is like, and actually in Leah's case, it didn't matter how far away she was because she was always just blipping around through shadows, so it didn't matter. Because Shadow Mode Barbarian, fun time.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I went through hell,
Damn.
but yeah, and battle maps are great because it does help people who have a little bit of trouble struggling with the imaginative portion. But it does come down to skill, right? And sometimes it is, in a weird sense, I think at later on, and this has also just been because Star Trek Adventures and some of the games I'm running now, it just Theater of the Mind seems to be my go-to now. My home game here that, ironically enough, I run on Thursdays as well. Home game as well is like, I'll still do like battle maps and stuff just because we have a lot of spellcasters and we kind of need it. Especially when they're level 13. But
Yeah.
I think we have two. Is it just one melee? I don't remember. I think only one of them's Marshall, and even that one has like some spellcasting to their name. But I've grown to like Theater of the Mind a little bit better. And my logic for it is a little strange because not everyone is great at like imagining things in their mind's eye, but thinking about it and how things go in their mind's eye, especially in like a game where there's no stakes, there's no recording or anything like that. But even then, when I am recording something, Theater of the Mind does something that I think is so intrinsically valuable that a battle map can never do. It lets the player decide how it looks
Mm,
in their imagination. A battle map is never going to allow you to do that as effectively because a battle map, you have this weird expectation that the battle map is that's that. That's it.
right.
Not that though. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point because like so much of what TTRPGs are, both in mechanics and in terms of just like the flavor or even like description, so much of it is representational. And I think the tendency for a lot of people is to have that like representational things spill over into combat. But the problem with that is that once you put something concrete, literally put something concrete on the table, like a battle map, for example,
There's a
then
weird expectation that that's
that's
binding.
literal. But even though you as the DM are thinking like, oh, this is still we're still living in representational land, but like no, because the moment you put it on the table, that's just the way that our like human brains are wired. We're wired to deal analog, not
Right.
and so like if it is physical, even if you intend it as a representation, there's some aspect of our brains that are like, no, this is just literally what it looks like. And like I find myself even doing it as a DM, where I know what I have done is representational, but I still treat it as law
You
because
fall
it's
in the
just
trap. You just
well,
it
and
just
it's
happens almost.
I wouldn't even say that it's necessarily a trap sometimes, because sometimes it's just easier to do it that way because your brain is focusing on so many other
Sure.
things in that moment. It's easier to just not treat the thing as a representation, and like because you've got something physical and concrete there on the table right in front of you. Why would you do the extra work of doing the imagination representational part? So like I get it. And it is a weird thing. I kind of wanted to shift gears real quick because
Well,
I would
before you,
yeah,
sorry,
go
before
ahead.
you do that, I will say that like some of that stuff is really handy for when everything had to go online. Everyone was remote.
Yes.
That's where it is helpful, especially on like Roll20 might not work on my computer very well, but it works for like what you kind of want to do when
Right.
you're
Mm-hmm.
in different states or different parts of the world. Then it's good.
Definitely. And I think that
Yeah.
is very helpful, especially and I think you make a good point. Online, it's so much harder to keep everybody's like not just focus in terms of what's going on, but also it's so much harder to kind of like coordinate, like what is
Yeah,
happening. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's easier to have
unless
something unless
unless you happen to be in a group of players. This is not something I'm just imagining because of how like doing theater. I'm just imagining if you had a D&D group of all theater kids, what would that look like? And I'm thinking that it might even work on camera to do theater of the mind. It might also be a hot mess. I don't know.
yeah.
So here is my experience with that because I absorb so many different like actual play mediums when I have the time, especially at work when I have no desire to talk to anyone that is less intelligent than me. But um, when I'm listening to that, and especially like my go-to is now that I'm caught up, it kind of sucks though. But NADPOD's been really good for like helping me figure out like how to narrate theater of the mind and
Mm.
stuff, and still feel very cinematic and stuff. But to Freeman's point, um, it is both really engaging, but it also has the potential to turn into a disaster. And there's 3 players, um, and it is it's a little bit of chaos, but I will say like each each one has the reason for existing for sure. Because as we know, like in terms of D&D, truly its original, its very first form is just, pen, paper, dice. That's it. Um, and now things are being a little bit more active and stuff. But I would say Theater of the Mind is better um, when you have a game that is going to be more driven by RP than you have with more combats. Now, that's not to say that combats can't happen and still feel very intense and cinematic, But theater of the mind works better in terms of like describing a town or the atmosphere of like how something looks or feels or what the senses might be. In
Yeah.
a large scale battle, a battle map is probably going to be better, even if it's just a white, 1 by 1 inch grid paper and you just lay some
Right.
pennies or Othello pieces out just as markers.
Mm-hmm.
They still help. You can write, or just have, a whole bunch of 6-sided die and it's like flip up a number on the die is like
I love that.
every digit on that number, that's 10 feet. Just like,
Mm-hmm.
and then you just draw a line and then it's like a square or something. It's like that's 10 feet up. You don't have to do super complex things for battle maps and that still translates pretty well to like a theater of the mind aspect. But as long as you have reference points, and as long as you don't forget reference points in theater of the mind combat or in battle map type of combat, I think the problem solves itself for the most part. And like Lynn's saying here is like some people just don't have the capacity for like full on mind's eye, in which case a battle map is more helpful. Unfortunately, a lot of the battle maps that like come in my brain for like this would be an interesting encounter just don't exist, and I do not have the time to go into like Incarnate and make one.
Yeah.
When that is the case, you can always do something with an encounter that is not a full-on battle. You can make an encounter have objectives instead of HP.
Yeah.
If a combat has objectives, it's far more interesting than just I hit it really hard. But that can be fun every now and again, but it's such a slog.
Yeah.
You just reminded me because several years ago, Lucas spent a week building a battle of a specific battle map.
It just never gets touched.
No, we fought on it. We went all over that thing.
Yeah.
I died on that map.
Yeah. Yeah.
My barbarian died. It was
And he wasn't the only one who died in that combat either.
It's so good. I have pictures of that still.
Yeah. No, it was yeah. I think you guys kind of really kind of covered that. I don't know that I have much to add as far as that goes. I did want to go back though and talk about because this is, and the reason I want to talk about this is because I've had this sort of new insight myself, right? So it's talking about like players. This is a little bit of an etiquette thing, a table etiquette thing. So I sort of touched on it before, right? And it's sort of a realization that I had literally just within the last couple of days. And it comes from a comment that I've gotten from players on occasion that I'm sure many of you can probably relate to. And this is sort of like what I said earlier, which is players saying to me like, oh, I feel bad when the spotlight is on me for so long. I feel like I'm hogging the spotlight. I feel bad when we're doing this stuff. And it's always been a comment that has like bothered me, and but I never really like pressed the issue, and only recently did I realize why it bothers me. And I think it's because it is the players assuming an element of the DM's job, and that is like the element of focus. Now, here's my take on this. I think everyone at that table has an equal responsibility to make sure that everyone else at that table is having a good time and is included and is, whatever. I think everybody has it. But this is the new thing that I just had recently. I think players' responsibility in that respect is very different than a DM's responsibility.
Oh, for sure.
The DM's responsibility is determining like where the focus is, determining where the spotlight is, right? And like that can be instigated by a player saying like, oh, I want to do this thing. And then the DM agrees and says, yes, this is where the spotlight is now. Right. Mm-hmm. But as a player, I don't think it's your responsibility to determine where that spotlight should be. Right. Like, so if it's on you for a long time, it's not your responsibility to determine that it needs to be somewhere else now. Right. But what it is your the way that you as a player can fulfill your responsibility to your other players at that table is by bringing other people into that spotlight with you. Not like accept that the spotlight is where it is. But if you feel that badly about being in the spotlight, bring someone else in. That's your responsibility as a player, I think. When it comes to me as the DM, if the spotlight is on you and has been for a while, it's because I've decided that's where it needs to be right now. And the moment it doesn't need to be there, I'll move it. You know?
Right.
And I think that's why this kind of commentary has bothered me personally. Like, on a general level, it's because it's sort of assuming a responsibility that isn't yours as a player. On a personal level, it bothers me because to me, even though I know it isn't meant this way, it does feel like a dismissal of my agency as a DM, right? Like, saying that, like, oh, the spotlight is only on me because I am hogging it there, as if the DM doesn't have a say in where the spotlight is, you know?
Yeah.
I recognize that's not a rational response to that. I'm just saying that's how I personally have felt about it in the past.
And there is a way to get around that, I feel like. When a player or a DM feels like that, especially as a player, one thing that you can do is, this is a really weird way of putting it into metaphor, but do a long camera shot. Just do one take. You know, a good example is actually Serenity, the Firefly movie. The first opening scene, you get introduced to everyone in one take.
Yeah.
But the spotlight is on Mal the whole time.
Yeah,
so you can facilitate that. You can keep the spotlight on this person, but if you as the player feel you need to include someone, allow the GM to keep the spotlight on you, but you can determine where that camera is going to go.
Right. And the other thing is, like, as a player, you also get to say, like, oh, all right, I've done what I wanted to do, and now I think this scene is over. Like, that's obviously something that you can do as well. But, like, I'm not really referring to that. I'm more referring to this, to, like, a feeling of guilt that somehow, like, you're sort of, like, taking up all the oxygen in the room, which, in fairness, is a real thing that everyone should be, like, aware of, whether or not they are doing. Even outside of TTRPGs, you should be doing that. But, like...
God, I wish my coworkers would know that.
Like, it's one of those things that... yes, you do be aware and check yourself on whether or not you are steamrolling people, upstaging people, or stepping on people's toes. However, do not confuse participation at the table with taking up all the oxygen in the room. Those are not the same thing. And, like, that's where I find that my sort of, I guess, antipathy is too strong, but my sort of, like, I guess, frustration...
Aversion? Slight aversion?
Yeah, aversion to this kind of line of thinking. And it's... Yeah, exactly, Leah. It's always the people who aren't that worried about it, and never the people who are. Yeah, the people who are worried about this thing are almost never the ones who have the problem, you know? They're the people who are worried that they are, like, steamrolling others is usually not the people who are actually doing that. And, like, that's one of those things where... I don't know, it's something I really never thought about until just within the last few days, because it's come up in our actual home game. This sort of idea that, you know, like, look, you came to this table to participate in the game. Participating in the game isn't taking it away. Like, when you, like, okay, like, TTRPGs and role-playing is not a zero-sum game. If you are participating and you are role-playing and, you know, playing your character or whatever, that doesn't mean that there's less TTRPG for everybody else at the table. Like, that, or at least it doesn't have to be that.
No.
And, like, you can, I don't know, I think just because the focus is on you, one, doesn't mean that it's always going to be, or even has always been. And two, it also doesn't mean that it has to be that. It doesn't have to be only you. You as a player get to decide whether somebody else at this table needs to be in this scene. Or maybe they don't need to be in this scene, but they also haven't talked in a while, and you think this is a good opportunity to bring them in, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have the spotlight. It's my job. It's as a player, I have the spotlight. And which means that it's it's my privilege to determine who else is in it with me, if anyone, right?
Yeah.
Like, I can decide as a player what to do with that spotlight when it's on me, and that includes bringing other people into it. And I think that's kind of where. So this is simultaneously me complaining about a problem and also providing the solution to that, right? Because if you feel guilty, if you're a TTRPG player and you routinely feel guilty that you are taking up too much time at the table, a great way to address that, bring somebody else in with you.
Mm-hmm.
That's something you should be doing anyway. I love it when
camera shot.
Yeah, exactly. I love it when like I'm like, all right, we're gonna focus on you because narratively, as the DM, I have determined that that's where the spotlight. It makes sense for it to be right now. But I also kind of feel bad that so and so hasn't really had a chance to participate. If the player I put the spotlight on decides to bring that player in, man, I love that because it takes some of the pressure off of me as a GM.
It's why I love too, and like another thing that helps too for me, again, kind of going back to the whole short form games too, is just vignettes do great in terms of like setting the stage and stuff, and sometimes you can combine people in vignettes and stuff and kind of shift and stuff. And if you have a decent table that does really well and meshes really well with each other, you don't have to do that work. They'll do it for you. They will do that work for you for the most part. Where they'll just be like, I'm gonna go seek this out. Like, I'm not gonna stop you. I'm just gonna get the ring light, and it's gonna go that way, and then we're just gonna follow this street for a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do see what you're saying. Is like sometimes players have that guilty feeling, and to that point, right, that was said, is just like, you know, to Leah's point is the whole, you know, people who feel that way are never going to be that problem. Almost never. There's rare instances for sure, maybe. But in general, people who feel that way are conscious enough to feel that way. And if you're a player that feels that way, please don't, because the GM is there to facilitate and move things as accordingly.
Yeah.
People who are... I don't want to call it full-on, like, main character syndrome, because sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes people just aren't as aware. There are definitely instances with that, for sure, because and one of those things, I myself have this weird belief, and maybe y'all won't agree with this, but I do think it takes being at a bad table to recognize what a good one is, to some degree. And sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you just get really lucky and have a really good experience, and then the sour one comes way down the line, if at all. But my experiences, I kind of learned throughout the years of over like 13-ish years of doing. Jesus, 13? Oh my God. Anyways, why did that hurt me so much? But
I'm pushing 20. Like, we're not there yet, but I'm pushing 20 years of this shit. So
yeah, but I mean, it's one of those things. You just learn about it as you go, and as a player, like, one of the things I've noticed is terms of when I'm playing, one of the things I want to do the next time I am a player in something, I think I'm gonna choose, because I'm usually someone who plays more support, so I play more reactionary, and that's just a GM instinct that I want to kind of have gone to some degree when I'm a player.
right.
And when you're a GM and then you still play, it's hard to get rid of that feeling. It really is. But it's why the next type of game that I'm in, I would probably prefer to play something more martially based, because you're kind of forced into being a little bit more active.
Yeah.
I miss the martial classes, honestly.
Love me a martial class.
Me too.
My TTRPG hot take, and maybe it's not that hot of a take at all, is that the martial classes need more love. Anyway,
They do.
They do. Hey, let's see. Rangers are still asking for help. But
yeah.
the yeah, and a good example too, and people have their preference, but a good example to demonstrate like a martial class can be shown as interesting, right? Is like, because a lot of people think like, oh, spells, that's super interesting, and martial class is like, oh, that feels just hit things, it's boring. But a good example of a martial class is in terms of like CR, like Liam O'Brien's like Battle Master Halfling is a good example. Like, you can paint a picture with a martial class. You absolutely can.
Yeah.
There's no reason why you can't. And to play a martial class, I think, takes a different type of skill. To play one that paints a picture artfully takes a different type of skill, and it comes with experience, obviously. And it's a unique challenge because every time, as opposed to Fireball, Fireball's gonna look the same every time. Realistically, it's gonna look the same every time. You get to decide the flow and the fluidity and like what type of maybe martial arts movements you take inspiration from to make that attack or whatever. But a good way to make a martial class interesting is make sure that you... God, this is a weird way of saying, but in the theater, in a theater way of every time you do something with a martial class, show yourself up from the last time. Like, make it interesting. And it doesn't have to be super flashy, but as long as to you it feels like I put more commitment in this than I did the last time, and it looked good in my head. And that's as far as you need to go.
Yeah.
You don't ever have to go farther than that, because again, for a character, like, you're playing with a group, but your character at the end of the day, in the greatest sense of the word, is for you. It's not really for anyone else, it's more for you. So let that be a natural thing. And it comes to the whole spotlight thing again, is when you are, like, say your turn comes up in combat, don't be afraid to go all out with it. Absolutely do it, because right now, that turn's yours. You get to choose what you do with your turn. Spotlight's on you. And if it takes a while, because sometimes there are groups where you're just like, and it's your turn. I'm not recapping what just happened the last 5 turns. We're skipping over you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's absolutely
Lynn, we're
true.
not doing that. I fucking refuse. I will throw Disintegrate at level 2.
All monk campaign. Oh, look at that! It's already over. Because that's about how long it would last. Oh man.
An all monk campaign, but you all have to be different type. Obviously, like different. Like,
yeah,
flavors.
and that's the thing, that I have like a recorded game coming up that is like saying like an all bard game, but I do have stipulations like everyone has to hit at least a subclass. I don't care if you multi-class, but hit a subclass at least.
Right.
And don't double up, because that's boring.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that is like one of those shorter type of games, but it's again, this comes down, and actually this is a good demonstration as to why I don't have to always do the heavy lifting in terms of RP if you find a good group, because they're already over in Rune and Relic talking about characters and stuff. We don't even have a session 0 until the 8th. So I don't have to do much right now.
Right.
They'll probably have 70% of it done before a session 0 even happens. But in terms of, I guess, I don't know how. I mean, Lucas, you've asked me a few questions and stuff like that. I'm curious to if, Freeman, you have any like input or like questions that maybe you're curious about that I haven't really touched on as heavily.
I don't know at the moment. No, not at the moment. In terms of what we've been talking about, I did have a question earlier for GMs in general, though.
Sure,
Okay.
go for it.
But we kind of already touched. Well, it's like, what is like a? I hear the expression a lot, like forever GM, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there is an opportunity to be a player, what how do you guys go through that process? Like,
Poorly.
It depends on the system.
Yeah.
Oh wow, my answer is gonna be longer than Lucas's, I guess.
Oh, I have a longer answer, but go for it. I
Um.
have a spider friend to deal with.
Oh, nice.
I figured that was.
We'll fade them. So in terms of building a character when I am a player or am going to be a player, one of the things I always seem to end up doing is either I'll bring in someone that I haven't played in years, or if I'm doing a fresh character, it's real. I do it a very strange way. I feel like for some people, because some people go like, I want to play this race in this class or something like that. I don't do that. I've created the backstory and the experience, and then I built inwards. Outside in is my approach, not inside out. Because I find it more interesting to have a character that is informed by their live and or their past experience that will determine like the mechanics basis of it. To me, the mechanics can be fun and all, and I love multi-classing, maybe breaking the game a little bit every now and again. But as fun as the mechanics are, they're the lowest totem pole of the priority to me, because I think the character is far more interesting than the mechanics. So I'll always pick a kit, and truly, I don't know if this is a weird thing that happens to forever GMs when they are players, and maybe this is just like, confirmation bias, but my roles as a player fucking suck. They are terrible. One of the worst type of it was really funny, but it was terrible. In a Curse of Strahd game, there was a session where I rolled 5 times that session, and rolling a whole bunch of ones is impressive, but I rolled 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that game. The chances of that happening, and they were all like fairly narratively impactful rolls, and I was just like,
Ooh.
okay, yeah, that's cool. But again, I think that's more confirmation bias more than anything, because you roll a ton of dice as a GM, and also as a GM,
you don't care.
Not give a shit if you
do
roll
not
well
care.
or bad.
Yeah.
But when you, and I understand that's part of the game, but it is like one of those weird things where it's like GM to player flip, where it's like when you roll low,
it feels so bad.
Sucks.
It sucks, man. Yeah. I think so. My answer to this question, I actually am the opposite of you when I make characters. I tend to be mechanics first, and it's not because which is an ironic thing for me to say, because I tend to be very I prefer an emphasis on narrative, right? I love narrative. I love story beats. I love all that shit. But when I'm making a character, I'm mechanics first. And then I build a backstory around a character. That's not always true. Sometimes, for me, it's hard to get excited about playing. I make jokes about being a forever DM, but the truth is I'm more comfortable in the GM seat than as a player. And when I get a chance to play a TTRPG, I'm usually... It takes a long time for me. It takes a lot for me to find something to get excited about in playing the character. And so more often than not, I'm in the boat of I will build the character in whatever way is required for me to be excited about it. And sometimes I have a really cool concept for a backstory of a character or some interest or our personality type or whatever. And sometimes it's just I really like this class combo and I'm going to try it because it's weird.
You take what I would consider the Axford approach to building a character, which is I don't remember. She said this in like one of the Hearthside chats or whatever the hell it was called, but it was just like determining the level and then deciding like the level and then like character and class is like what is the coolest thing I can do with this right
Yes, absolutely, 100%. That's what I do. There have been many of my characters that have been built entirely around. This is a really cool interaction of abilities, and like,
now?
and I think that's one of the reasons why maybe I don't enjoy playing as often, because more often than not, I recognize this is probably a communication issue more than anything else, but more often than not, I'll build a character entirely around like a mechanic that I enjoy and think is compelling and cool about it. And then when it comes time to actually like be in the game, that it never comes up. And so the reason I say this is a communication issue more than anything else is that I think maybe it's on me to communicate to my GMs in those instances what is exciting to be about the character.
Yeah, and
And I think that's
uh,
maybe true even outside of the context of like short games or being a GM turned player.
absolutely.
I think more players need to communicate to their GMs in very specific terms what it is that is exciting to them about their characters. Because I think that's what makes it easier for a GM. That'll make it so much easier for a GM to facilitate that, you know? Because like, there's nothing that sucks more than making a character for like a one shot or whatever, and you find like one thing that you're really excited about with them, and then it turns out that that thing is just not going to come up in the campaign, or the one shot or the whatever. Like that really feels bad, and that's one of the reasons I think that I rarely like being a player in a game. But I don't know. Is this kind of what you were talking about, Freeman, in your question? Was this kind of like what you were getting
Yeah.
at?
You got it.
Yeah, because like I think the most simplistic answer I can give to the question of like what does it look like when I'm a player is it looks like a whole lot of me doing nothing until the 11th hour and 59th minute, and then throwing together a character that I was like, yeah, this seems fun. And that's it. That's the whole
Perfect.
thing. And sometimes it's fun because of the mechanics, and sometimes it's fun because I think it'd be fun to play that character. That's yeah.
I get the mechanic thing too, because
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I won't do mechanics. I won't worry about that so much unless I'm doing like something that I'm unfamiliar with the first couple rounds, like magic classes, for instance. I'll be like, I'm gonna build this mechanically. I'll figure
Mhm.
out the story in like when the cameras are like on me, and then in terms of like another character where there's not really any magic involved, I'll kind of like just the mechanics I know, like barbarian, like okay, I can do that in my sleep at this point. I played barbarian
Yeah.
for like 5 6 years. I'll just like work on all the character stuff here.
Yeah. I think oh, I was going to say something else about this as well, which is
Oh,
about the character creation. I also, on the subject of like backstories, and hold on, I'll get to it. I'll come. Oh, just another thing for me is I think a lot of my decisions in terms of character creation are just what's weird and unusual.
Mhm.
I like to live there. I live in the realm of what's weird and unusual, but might still kind of work. I've said it before on Ramblemancy. One of my favorite characters that I've made, even though mechanically it was pretty clunky, but it was so fun, was a multi-classed illusion wizard and drunken master monk.
I can see how that would work in terms of
It's
very
yeah,
strange mechanics. I can also see from a GM perspective how much hell that is.
I mean, in
Um,
fairness, we were like level 6, so it wasn't like we were.
yeah, that's not too
So
bad, but there's still
yeah,
enough to be like, what's going on?
yeah. It was so
I
fun,
actually have a few. But
and then to add to it, just because I wanted to make it even weirder, I made him a high elf. Because I was like, you know what you don't see? High elf drunkards. So
yeah, that was a fun character.
well,
Cameron.
yeah,
they take the whole like, if you see a drunken high elf, a Men in Black flash, you're just like, nope,
no, you
didn't
didn't.
see that.
I love that.
Listen, we are
That's what
past
the
the end of our
enchantment
time.
wizards are for. That's it.
Yeah. we are past the end of our time a little bit. So I think we're gonna take this as a good stopping point, a good opportunity to sort of head out. Joe, thanks so much for coming and joining us. This was a fun
Yeah, I'll
conversation.
have a different expectation when we start up next time, whenever this happens.
Yeah, exactly. No,
I will make sure I don't feel safe.
Yeah, I've informed Joe that everybody's first time on Ramblemancy, they get a free pass. They are safe from any shenanigans.
Yep.
After that, all bets are off. So, like, if you have food in your mouth and I'm going live, I'm sorry, you're just gonna have to be okay with that.
You motherfucker! I got spell deflection.
All right. Well, Joe, why don't you tell everybody who doesn't know already where they can find you?
Right. As you know, Joe LaPlante here. I can be found on the Rune and Relic Twitch channel, as well as our Discord, which you can have a link to, I believe, on our channel Twitch over there. I believe it's Rune, whatever. I'll look through it. But Rune and Relic, you'll be able to find it, or on YouTube as well, because I upload stuff there in a very intermittent and chaotic way, because YouTube likes to fight me. And if I could get into YouTube administration, I'd fight them too. But you can find me on there. Typically, I'm planning something, or every now and again, I might post stuff in the Looking for Game chat, like game applications and stuff. Feel free to pop in whenever I decide to do that. Also, I'm never not working on stuff, so stuff will eventually happen. But you can catch me there. Right now we're doing a little bit of a hiatus for our Star Trek Intelligence game, but we will be going back at it pretty heavily in second week of August, I think, is our slated time. And it's getting a lot more intense than Season 1 has been getting. It's been getting up there. But you can find me throughout those areas and spaces. I used to I think I still technically do have a Twitter, and I will never call it the other thing because I refuse, and there should be no respect there. But you can find me through any of those links or looking up. It shouldn't be that difficult. And we also have a little setting up a whole little play-by-post thing if people are interested in things like that. But yeah, I'm not doing anything particularly interesting aside from working on stuff that comes down the pipeline right now. So
awesome. Well, yeah, thanks for coming by. We just some reminders. We have no Ramblemancy next week, while we set up for the following weeks to come, and the absence of our resident bard Jonathan Boyle. So will be no Ramblemancy next week. If you would like to catch this or any of our other content, you can find it on YouTube, organized into nice little playlists if you wish. We've got Ramblemancy going back all the way to 2019, I think. Maybe we don't have any pre-2020. I don't remember what we have on YouTube.
Starts sweating and looks at YouTube. Is that true? Is that true?
I don't. Freeman over here fact-checking me on our own goddamn stream. But yeah, you can catch all of it over on YouTube at Rule of Lore. And of course, if you want to keep up with what we're doing and what's going on and be up to date on the latest things, you can always join us on Discord, where you will have all of our weekly announcements as well as any just sort of discussion about the stuff that we're doing. So, yeah, feel free to jump in. Patrons, be aware there will be changes coming to Patreon, and yeah, some of them have already been rolled out. So, awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming by tonight. Joe, thank you for hanging out with us this evening. We'll see you all 2 weeks from now for some more Ramblemancy. But if not, we'll see you the next time you decide to come roll with us. Good night and good zone.